Hello everybody, and welcome to the first College of Dwarfology since the release of the Steam version of Dwarf Fortress. Today's class will be discussing the new labor system implemented in Dwarf Fortress. I will be using as an educational aid the beta version of Dwarf Therapist, because a lot of you do not have faith in the labor system, and seeing is believing. I will say that most of it works better than some of you believe it does, though there are a few hiccups that might be causing some of you confusion. Going ahead, there are two control schemes in the labor system of Dwarf Fortress right now. The everybody does this to the nobody does this line, and the red and green squares as skills are assigned. While it is not the direct order of operations as presented by Putnam in the forums, I will be addressing this as if every labor does the everybody does this to nobody does this line first, and then addressing how it does the green to red squares second. Again, this is not the actual order of operations, but I believe it makes it easier to understand. First of all, everybody does this means that that detail might as well have not existed. If you create a custom work detail and say everybody does this, it is the exact same thing as not having that detail at all. This is because the everybody does this to nobody does this line first allows it for everyone and then removes it from the people who do not need it. So if you have a labor that says everybody does this, guess what? Everybody does all the labors associated with that skill. If there is not a work detail that is assigned to a skill to address it, it is presumed to just be on everybody does this. There is no reason to create a work detail assigned to a skill and then to set it to everybody does this, unless you're predicting in the future that you wish to set it to only selected people do this. Step 2 of the process, if you have only selected people do this, and going in columns, you will find that only selected people do this will turn off those skills. Everybody in each individual column has that skill turned off unless they had it selected. If you are familiar with the Dwarf Therapist system, that is the easiest way to envision how the work detail system works, is that all of these is just simply mimicking a column of the old system. If you have nobody does this and you set it to nobody does this, then everything is set to off in that system. As we just saw, miner is mining. That's all it does. If I set it real quick to this and then do a reread, we will note that mining is literally only the mining skill. That is all it does. However, of note, right now, the mining skill appears to be doing double duty and is also your deconstructing skill. If you are doing a massive dig project at the same time that you are trying to correct portions of a large construction project, then you're going to have a hard time as your miners will be needing to split their attention. For the most part, this is not a problem as you can now build walls on top of floors. As we go on, woodcutting, as previously intimated at, is just that. It is woodcutting. There is no hidden things in it. That's all it does. No more, no less. Hunters is hunting. Again, no more, no less. It's just hunting. It's not any of the hunting related skills. It's just hunting. Planters is farming. Fisher dwarves, importantly enough, is just fishing. It is not fish cleaning or fish dissection. It is just the skill that is fishing. Plant gathering is plant gathering. Stone cutters is stone cutting. Now, this is a bit of a difference from how things slightly worked before, because stone cutting is not to be confused with masonry. Stone cutting now has taken up some of masonry's old purview, which means that stone cutting is used to make stone blocks, smooth walls, and carve fortifications. Stone cutting is no longer part of stone engraving, where you make the pictures. These are now 3 separate skills, where we've taken half from masonry and half from stone engraving to create stone cutting. Engraving is now just engraving. However, engraving can be done on constructions now. So if you are in need for room for practice, you can just set up a bunch of walls and practice on those. Haulers is every hauling job at once. That is what it does. That is all it does. Every hauling job. And now we get to where there might be some confusion. As many of you know, there is a new medical system in Dwarf Fortress, and there appears to be some misunderstandings going with it. An orderly, in this case, is not the old 2 treated skills that used to be on for every dwarf. Orderlies are now recovering wounded, feed patients and prisoners. Most importantly, it is also dressing wounds and suturing. Orderlies are not necessarily to be set to everybody does this, because this could mean that you have every dwarf from around the map trying to go and do dressing wounds and suturing if they so need. There is a priority system we will discuss, but for now, be aware that Orderlies is actually your medical dwarves. They are the ones doing the majority of the work on suturing and dressing wounds. Every time there is an injury and the doctor has to come by and does his diagnosis, then usually there's a surgery, then someone has to dress the wounds and suture it back closed. So this is a very important skill to have. Make sure you have dwarves in it. If you have it set to only selected do this, this also means that no one else is doing feed patients, prisoners, or recovering wounded. And recovering wounded is where they grab them from the field. So there is a bit of a split identity here where you want it set to everybody does this for right after a fight. And then if you want to focus some dwarves down, you want to set it back to only selected do this, or you set it to red. Now, speaking of the red line, the red lights and the green lights, I have been clicking them on and off throughout this. The way those work is to go across the rows. If everybody does this, only selected do this, and nobody does this, are the up and down columns, the red lines should be assumed to be the rows going across. This is important. If they are set to a red line or the red square, they will only ever have the labors assigned. If you have someone assigned to mining, in this example, and red, and then later you decide you don't want them to mine, so you turn off mining, but you forget to take them off red, you've told this dwarf to do nothing. The red form, while it is said in the upper right corner, is a specialized assignment. What it means is direct control. If you have nothing to the right of the red square, they will not do it. This is a superseding order over anything done in the columns between everybody does this, only selected do this, and nobody does this. If you set a dwarf to red, whatever you have additively is the only things that they will be doing. So be careful with setting those. But if you are someone who is really wishing for that old style of control where you micromanage every skill or group of skills, this is how you'll be doing it underneath the custom labors. Simply create a custom labor for each grouping you're wanting to do. Do not forget hauling, amongst other things, and then set them to red. There are a few things to be aware of with this that can be causing some problems. One, the aforementioned, miners are deconstruction. So if you have a lot of people set to miners, you'll probably be able to deconstruct better. If you don't have a lot of people set to miners, you're going to be deconstructing slower. Two, right now the generic haulers is every hauling. So if you have specialty dwarves that do the hauling of stone or the hauling of wood, you will need to turn hauling off and then go and make your custom things, your custom hauling orders. Three, as previously discussed, Orderlies does much everything in terms of medical. There's a secondary thing with this where if you have a hospital, the hospital has, the hospital hates me. The hospital has a few jobs assigned to it. A doctor, a diagnostician, a surgeon, and a bone doctor. Many of you are assuming that the doctor job is what is doing the suturing and dressing wounds job. This is not true. A doctor job is someone who is doing, we put on him, the doctor job is someone who is, is it because of hunting? Or did I just not read? There we go. The doctor job is diagnosis, surgery, and setting bones, whereas the diagnostician is merely the diagnostician, the surgeon is the surgeon, and the bone doctor is doing the individual skill of taking care of bones. Oh, I've caused an issue again. You got to turn it to red. There we go. So this means that your doctor is going to stand there doing nothing if you have no one under the orderly skill. Because as a dwarf is treated, he'll go in, he'll need to be diagnosed to figure out what his wounds are, then one wound will get treated, albeit through suturing and dressing, or possibly surgery and bone setting. But after surgery and bone setting is set up, they'll need to be diagnosed again. And then after they get diagnosed again for further treatment, they'll get sutured and wounds dressed, then they'll get diagnosed again to see the next step. Then the next part of them will get treated. You'll have to sit there and go through surgery, setting bones, etc., suturing, dressing wounds, and they'll get diagnosed again. If your dwarf is sitting there and he needs to be sutured or have his wounds dressed, what you're waiting on is an orderly. So if you have the opinion that your doctors aren't doing anything, it's because they cannot do anything. They're waiting for the orderlies to get there. The orderlies are the medical job right now. The job of doctor appears to just be a kind of backup skill. If we go ahead into the custom labors, for instance, I will grab carpentry for this show. We'll do carpentry twice. If you have an overlapping issue, go away real quick. I'm just going to take them back off of these so that I don't have to have too many overlapping duties. And I shouldn't have done carpentry. We'll do hauling instead, but we'll take everyone off of everything. We'll leave one of the haulers on. Turn the orderly off. Okay. Now that we have set it almost to default and turned everyone back on, we see that because I have set haulers to only select to do this, only one dwarf is doing the hauling. If I set nobody does this, as we would assume, nobody is doing the hauling. Important detail, if say we set, I'm going to do two of these, stone hauling, done, and set you also to stone hauling, done. Turn this on someone, turn this on someone, and they are both set to only select to do this. And we do a reread, you will see that it is an additive in nature. Even though any job is saying no one else is allowed to do this, as long as any labor is telling them to do it, they are allowed to do it. If you have one of them, say haulers, set to everybody does this, that trumps any and all exclusionary orders you may set in an overlapping job. If we set this one to everybody does this, and this one to nobody does this, again, them all being set to stone hauling, the everybody does this has trumped the nobody does this. When going through in order, what will be happening is, as you go down the labors, it checks, it sets everyone on. Then it goes and it removes from the labors in columns anybody who is not selected if there is only selected or nobody does this applied. This is a permission set. So it doesn't matter what the detail is. If any detail in your custom orders or these generic orders is set to allow people to do that, be it everybody does this or an overlap in details, then they will be allowed to do it, even if you think you have disallowed them from doing this job. After those steps have been gone through, any dwarf set to a red button via the direct control will have all of their labors turned off explicitly, except for any labor that they have on. So again, the top system is a permission system where everybody is presumed to have the labor unless somehow they've been turned off of it. Whereas the other system, red, is presumed that they have everything off except for any labor that they have on. Hopefully between these two overlaps, this has made things clear in your games. There are a few final things I would point out to be careful if you were trying to do a ton of explicit rules. Remember that due to the overlap, it would be better to group things up in groups. If you want butchering, tanning, and leather working together, probably best to either make sure they're 3 individual labors or to group them together and only have one labor addressing it. You're going to have overlaps where your dwarves aren't going to work right if you're not following them. If, for instance, you have one labor that does butchery, tanning, and leather working, and another labor that does leather working and bone carving. You're going to have an overlap in leather working, and you'll have dwarves doing things you were not expecting them to do. There are also a few skills that are usually on or presumed on that are off under this system if you turn too many things onto red. Most importantly, no labor is doing levers right now. The more dwarves you set to red, the less dwarves there are to pull your labors. So if you're trying to assert direct control over too many dwarves and you forgot to assign a specialty class of labors to do, say, levers or road building or whatever, none of your dwarves will do it. One last thing to be aware of is workshops. Much like how the medical system was working, you can build a workshop and assign a dwarf to the workshop. The workshop is presuming that that dwarf will be doing the jobs at that workshop. That'll be addressed in another video. But this, I believe, has been a good starter to the Dwarf Fortress labor system. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've been educated, please tell others to come to class.